Marcus Rivera stood in that massive alien chamber, and man, you could cut the tension with a knife. His mouth tasted like he'd been sucking on pennies. Fear does that to you. Makes everything taste metallic and wrong. The guy was trying so hard not to shake. Here he was, this battle-hardened soldier who'd seen more combat than most people see movies, and his hands were trembling like leaves in a storm. The uniform collar felt tight around his neck. Each breath was work. Real work. 12 alien faces stared down at him. Not faces, really. Some had what looked like crystals where eyes should be. Others had skin that shifted colors like oil on water. One looked like it was made entirely of shadows that moved wrong. They weren't looking at Marcus like he was a person. They were looking at him like he was a bug they found under a rock. Don't let them see you sweat. That's what his old drill sergeant used to say. But the sweat was coming anyway, beading up on his forehead despite the chamber being cold as a morgue. Then the memories hit him. Chicago. Oh God, Chicago. He remembered driving through what used to be the suburbs. Where kids used to play on swings and slides, there was just twisted metal. Playgrounds turned into modern art made of melted steel and concrete. Schools that once echoed with children's laughter now stood empty. Tiny desks covered in dust and debris, waiting for students who would never come home. Marcus felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. That familiar anger started building in his chest. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you stupid. The cold, calculating kind that had kept him alive through 6 months of impossible odds. It started in his stomach like a ball of molten metal, then spread through his veins like liquid fire. The alien speaker stepped forward. This thing looked like a walking crystal formation, all sharp edges and facets that caught the light wrong. When it talked, its voice came from everywhere at once, bouncing off the walls like an echo in a canyon. Human Marcus Rivera. Even the way it said his name sounded like an insult. You stand accused of unprovoked aggression against peaceful exploration vessels. Peaceful exploration. Right. Your species has violated 17 interstellar treaties you never signed. The speaker's crystal body flashed with different colors as it talked. Destroyed property worth more than your entire planet's gross output. And worst of all. It paused here, and Marcus could swear the thing looked disgusted. You have shown defiance to the natural order. That's when Marcus felt his combat instincts kick in. His heartbeat shifted into that steady rhythm he knew so well. The one that meant business. His vision sharpened until he could see every detail in that massive chamber. The way the alien on the left kept shifting its weight. How the one made of shadows seemed to pulse with each word. The almost invisible shift in the lighting that told him weapon systems were charging up. These aliens thought they had him. Thought one human with a white flag meant game over. They had no idea what was coming. Peaceful exploration, Marcus repeated, letting each word hang in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. His hands stopped shaking completely. Not because he was calm. Because when rage crystallizes into something pure and focused, your body becomes a weapon. Is that what you call it when your explorers vaporize civilian evacuation centers? The speaker's crystal body flickered. Irritation, maybe. Or anger. Hard to tell with something that looked like a living chandelier. Civilian structures were eliminated to prevent unnecessary suffering during the integration process. Your species lacks the technological sophistication to comprehend the efficiency of our methods. Integration. They called it integration. Something broke inside Marcus's chest. Not physically, but you know that feeling when something inside you just snaps? Like a guitar string wound too tight. All that careful diplomatic training they'd given him before this meeting just evaporated like steam. His vision didn't blur or narrow. It got clearer. Sharper. Like someone had adjusted the focus on reality itself and suddenly he could see everything with perfect, terrible clarity. Integration, he whispered. Every single alien in that chamber leaned forward to hear him. Which was exactly what he wanted. In all his years of combat, Marcus had learned one thing. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the biggest threat. You vaporized a children's hospital and called it integration. The heat from his chest spread outward now. His fingertips tingled with barely contained violence. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring wound too tight. Part of him wanted to vault over the barrier separating him from these creatures and see how tough they really were up close. But Marcus Rivera hadn't survived the impossible by being stupid. He'd survived by being smarter than anyone expected. He straightened to his full height. Let his voice carry every ounce of conviction he possessed. Tell me, counselors. Do you know what humans call it when someone threatens our children? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. heavy with the promise that everything these ancient beings thought they knew about humanity was about to change forever. Marcus smiled. Several of the council members actually pulled back from that expression. It wasn't the smile of someone who'd given up. It was the smile of someone who'd been planning for this exact moment for months. We call it a declaration of war. The chamber exploded with noise. But this wasn't the kind of noise you'd recognize. Imagine 1,000 different animals all making sounds at once, but none of them are from Earth. There was chittering like giant insects, harmonic humming that made Marcus's teeth ache, and sounds that his human ears couldn't even process properly. It was like being inside a broken orchestra where every instrument was from another planet. The speaker's crystal body lit up like a disco ball having a seizure. Marcus had learned to read these alien expressions over the past few months, and this one was pure amusement. The kind of laugh you get when a toddler threatens to fight a heavyweight boxer. Condescending. Dismissive. Cruel. War. The speaker's voice carried those weird harmonic undertones that made it sound like it was talking and singing at the same time. Human Marcus Rivera, your entire species possesses fewer vessels capable of interplanetary flight than most council members have in their personal fleets. The alien paused, letting that sink in. Around the chamber, other council members were making their own versions of laughter. One sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. Another made a noise like grinding metal. None of it was pleasant. Your most advanced weapons barely qualify as theoretical to our science divisions. You speak of war as though you possess the capability to. Stop. Just one word. But the way Marcus said it cut through all that alien noise like a sword through paper. Not shouted. Not screamed. Just spoken with the kind of absolute certainty that makes everyone shut up and listen. Every translator in the chamber went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Marcus felt his pulse settle into that familiar rhythm. Combat calm, they called it in the special forces. That zone where everything slows down and gets crystal clear. Where your hands stop shaking and your mind becomes a weapon. The tremor in his fingers vanished completely, replaced by the rock-steady calm of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. You want to know about our capabilities? His movement was slow. Deliberate. Like he had all the time in the world. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, and every alien weapon system in the chamber tracked him like he was radioactive. Energy readings spiked. Guards tensed. Some of those crystal beings actually started glowing brighter, which probably meant their version of reaching for a gun. But all Marcus pulled out was a small tablet. Nothing fancy. Just looked like the kind of communication device humans had been using for decades. The aliens relaxed, thinking it was harmless. Big mistake. This contains the tactical records of your last 3 integration attempts. Marcus activated the device with a simple gesture. The air above the chamber shimmered like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then it resolved into something that made several council members actually lean backward in their seats. A 3-dimensional display filled the space above them. Perfect clarity. Perfect detail. And absolutely terrifying. The first image showed 12 massive ships hanging in space like dead whales. But these weren't just any ships. These were Caltheran battle dreadnoughts. Ships so powerful that entire star systems surrendered just from seeing them drop out of hyperspace. Ships that had ended rebellions and crushed civilizations for centuries. Now they looked like flowers blooming in reverse. Their proud hulls split wide open. Metal twisted into impossible shapes. What had once been the most feared military force in the Eastern Spiral Arm was now just expensive space junk floating in the void. The Caltherans arrived at our Jupiter colony expecting to find mining equipment and civilian populations. Marcus's voice had shifted into battlefield briefing mode. Clinical. Precise. No emotion, just facts delivered with the kind of authority that made people believe every word. Instead, they found 40,000 humans who had spent 6 months turning gas giant orbital platforms into weapons of mass destruction. The tactical display shifted angles. Now the aliens could see the battle from different perspectives. Multiple viewpoints showing the same impossible thing, humans winning against overwhelming odds. The council members watched in growing horror as ordinary human miners unleashed absolute hell on one of the galaxy's premier military forces. These weren't soldiers. They were people who dug holes and operated machinery for a living. But they fought like demons when their families were threatened. Your people fight with honor, Marcus said, and you could hear genuine respect in his voice. Disciplined formations. Coordinated fire patterns. Textbook defensive strategies. He paused, letting them see the Caltheran tactics in action. Beautiful formations moving like clockwork. Weapons firing in perfect synchronization. everything by the book. But they fight like civilized beings who expect their opponents to follow the same rules. The display showed the Calthran commander's final transmission. You could see the confusion in the alien's posture. This was a being of obvious intelligence and tactical brilliance, trying desperately to adapt to an enemy that refused to behave like enemies were supposed to behave. General Carthax was a brilliant strategist. In any conventional engagement, he would have won. Marcus looked around the chamber, meeting alien eyes that suddenly seemed less confident. But humans don't fight conventional engagements. We fight like the children of a world where survival meant killing anything that threatened the pack. The image shifted to show the final moments. Human ships swarmed the Calthran formation like angry bees attacking a bear. Some were barely more than engines with guns strapped to them. Others were clearly mining equipment that had been turned into weapons of war. None of it should have worked. All of it did. Every human ship in that battle was crewed by volunteers. People who left behind families, friends, entire lives, because they knew that if the Caltharans succeeded, there wouldn't be any families left to come home to. The weight of that statement settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Several council members had gone completely still, their full attention focused on the human standing before them. Marcus smiled. But this wasn't a happy smile. This was the smile of someone who had more bad news to deliver. But the Caltharans weren't the worst of it. His voice carried a new edge now. Not anger. Something far more dangerous. Something that sounded like satisfaction. Would you like to know what happened to the Xerian hegemony's second fleet? The temperature in that chamber dropped like someone had opened an airlock to space. Marcus activated the next set of recordings, and you could feel the change in him. His breathing stayed steady, controlled, but now there was something different in the way he stood. Something predatory. Like a wolf that had caught the scent of wounded prey. Marcus remembered Commander Rebecca Hayes like it was yesterday. Sitting in that underground bunker beneath what used to be Denver, watching her dark eyes track enemy movements with the precision of a supercomputer. She'd been Navy intelligence before everything went to hell. Trained to think not just one step ahead, but 3, 4, sometimes 5. The Xerians were about to find out what that kind of mind could do when pushed to the breaking point. The hegemony's approach was different, Marcus said, his jaw muscles tightening as the memories came flooding back. Dark memories. The kind that wake you up screaming at 3 in the morning. No demands for surrender. No offers of peaceful integration. They just started glassing population centers from orbit. The tactical display shifted to show Earth during those nightmare weeks. Where major cities used to be, there were now radioactive craters that glowed in the dark. New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, all gone. Turned to glass and ash in minutes. Rivers of refugees flowed like blood toward underground shelters that everyone knew wouldn't be enough. Wouldn't be safe enough. Wouldn't last long enough. But it was all they had. They broadcast one message while they were doing it, Marcus continued, his voice getting harder with each word. Resistance is inefficient. But the display showed something else too. Movement in the outer parts of the solar system. Subtle shifts that looked like desperate evacuation attempts. The Xerians had seen it and dismissed it as exactly that. Cowards running for their lives. They were wrong. Rebecca Hayes was 43 years old. Mother of 2. Had never fired a shot in anger before the invasion. Marcus paused, letting that sink in. She was also the most brilliant tactical mind I've ever encountered. And she'd spent 3 months studying every recorded Xerian engagement from the past century. Marcus's hands clenched into fists as he remembered that moment. The moment they got word about Phoenix. 2 million people. Gone. Just like that. Including Rebecca's sister and her 8-year-old nephew Tommy. The sound Rebecca made when she heard wasn't a scream. Wasn't a sob. It was something worse. Something that sounded like a human soul breaking apart and rebuilding itself into something made of pure, cold hatred. The Xerians pride themselves on efficiency, Marcus said, and now his voice carried satisfaction. Dark, terrible satisfaction. Every ship has a specific role. Every weapon system optimized for maximum effect. Every crew member trained to respond to threats according to doctrine refined over thousands of years. The display showed the Xerian Second Fleet in perfect formation. Their ships looked like geometric nightmares. All sharp angles and mathematical precision. They moved like clockwork as they systematically turned Earth's surface into molten glass. What they didn't account for was that humans had been studying their doctrine for 3 months. Learning every pattern. Every response protocol. Every tactical preference. Marcus looked around the chamber, meeting alien eyes that were starting to show something new. Something that might have been fear. And unlike them, we weren't trying to conquer territory or preserve resources. His smile could have cut diamond. We were just trying to kill them all. The tactical recording shifted to show something impossible. Human vessels appearing inside the Zirian formation. Not through fancy cloaking tech. Through something much simpler and much more terrifying. They'd been hiding in the debris of their own cities. Every piece of wreckage they created became camouflage for our counterattack, Marcus explained. Every crater they carved in our world became a launch platform. They thought they were demonstrating their power. Instead, they were giving us the perfect cover for the largest ambush in human history. The council members watched in growing horror as their tactical situation flipped upside down in minutes. Zirian ships, caught completely off guard, started firing on each other in desperation. Perfect formations dissolved into chaos as human forces attacked from directions that shouldn't have been possible. Ships appeared from inside asteroid belts that hadn't been there an hour ago. From debris clouds that suddenly came alive with weapons fire. From the wreckage of human cities that had been turned into improvised military bases. But the real genius of Rebecca's plan wasn't the ambush, Marcus whispered. The display showed Zirian vessels trying to retreat. Their perfect formations breaking apart like glass under a hammer as they scrambled to reach hyperspace jump points. But every escape route was blocked. Every line of retreat cut off by human forces that seemed to materialize from empty space itself. You see, the Zirians made one critical error in their intelligence assessment. Marcus met each council member's gaze in turn. Some of them were actually trembling now. They assumed we would fight like civilized beings trying to preserve our civilization. But they'd already destroyed our civilization. What they faced wasn't an army defending a homeland. His voice dropped to barely audible. It was a pack of predators with nothing left to lose and an infinite capacity for creative violence. The final image showed empty space where the Zirian Second Fleet had been. Not even debris. Just void. As if an entire military force had simply been erased from existence. A single human transmission broadcasted across the local stellar group. Rebecca's voice, steady and cold as winter space. Earth remembers. Earth endures. Earth will have justice. Several council members had gone completely silent. Others were making sounds Marcus didn't recognize. Fear sounds, maybe. Or the alien equivalent of whimpering. Marcus smiled. They were finally starting to understand. Humans weren't the primitive species they thought they were hunting. They were the apex predators. The silence in that chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. The only sounds were the soft hum of alien life support systems and the barely audible whir of recording devices capturing every word for history. Marcus could feel the shift in the room's energy. Where there had been mocking laughter just minutes ago, now there was something else creeping in. Uncertainty. Maybe even the first whispers of fear. But not full fear. Not yet. The speaker's crystal body pulsed with colors that Marcus had learned meant forced confidence. Like someone trying to convince themselves they weren't scared while walking through a graveyard at midnight. 2 fleets, the speaker said, its voice carrying artificial strength. Impressive for a primitive species, certainly, but hardly. 3 fleets. Marcus cut through those words like a hot knife through butter. This time, his voice carried undertones that made several council members actually jerk back in their seats. Physical recoil, like he'd slapped them. You're forgetting the Void Hunters. The change was instant. Dramatic. Like someone had flipped a switch and turned the chamber's atmosphere from tense to terrified. Several alien dignitaries actually shifted in their seats. Marcus caught sounds he didn't recognize, whispered prayers maybe, in languages that human ears weren't designed to understand. The Void Hunters weren't just another military force. They were legend. Nightmare. The thing that civilizations told scary stories about around their campfires. The Council's ultimate solution when diplomacy failed, when conventional warfare wasn't enough, when entire species needed to simply disappear. The Void Hunters do not fail, the speaker said, but now its voice carried less certainty than before. Like someone trying to convince themselves of something they weren't sure they believed anymore. They exist partially outside conventional spacetime. Their weapons strike at the quantum level, unmaking matter at the fundamental. Existed. One word. Past tense. Marcus savored that word like fine wine, letting it hang in the air while the full meaning sank into every alien mind in the chamber. They existed partially outside conventional spacetime. He activated the final sequence of tactical recordings, and suddenly the chamber filled with images that shouldn't have been possible. Ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality like ghosts. Weapons that didn't explode in the traditional sense but caused sections of space to simply stop existing. Battle formations that operated according to physics that violated everything science thought it knew about how the universe worked. The Void Hunters arrived 6 weeks ago. Marcus's voice stayed steady despite the memories flooding back. Memories that still woke him up screaming in the middle of the night. No demands. No communications. No warnings. They simply began erasing our outer colonies from existence, working their way inward toward Earth itself. The tactical display showed systematic annihilation. Human outposts throughout the Sol system being deleted like files from a computer. Mars colony, home to 50,000 people, lasted exactly 3 minutes. The Jupiter mining platforms, where Marcus had friends working, were gone in 4 to 7 seconds. Europa Station, where his cousin Jake had been stationed, simply stopped existing. As if it had never been built at all. We lost 30,000 people before we even understood what we were facing. For the first time since he'd started talking, Marcus's voice cracked slightly. The professional soldier's composure slipped just enough to show the human being underneath. Men, women, children. People who had never fired a shot in anger, never hurt anyone in their lives. They were simply erased from existence because the council decided we were inconvenient. His hands started shaking again. But not from fear this time. From rage. Pure, crystallized fury that had been building for months, transforming from an emotion into something more fundamental. A force of nature that no amount of diplomatic training could contain. But you made one mistake with the Void Hunters. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing every council member to lean forward to hear him. You sent them after a species that had already lost everything. A people who had watched their children burn, their cities turn to glass, their entire civilization reduced to rubble and radiation. The tactical display shifted to show Earth as it had been during those final weeks. A scarred, broken world that looked like it had been through hell and back. Wrapped in defensive networks that didn't look like any military installation anyone had ever seen. They looked more like abstract art. Or maybe the fevered dreams of mad scientists. Several council members leaned forward, confusion written across their alien features. "What am I looking at?" one of them asked. Marcus smiled. This wasn't the cold, predatory smile from before. This was something genuinely terrifying. The smile of someone about to reveal a secret that would change everything. You're looking at a civilization that decided if they were going to die, they were going to take their killers with them. Every human being left alive, every man, woman, and child, working together on a single project. Which was? The question came out like a whisper. Like whoever asked it already knew they didn't want to hear the answer. We weaponized physics itself. The display showed the moment of contact. Void Hunter ships dropping out of their phase-shifted state to begin Earth's final sterilization. But instead of finding a helpless world waiting to be erased, they found themselves in a solar system that had been turned into the galaxy's largest particle accelerator. It turns out that beings who exist partially outside normal spacetime are extremely vulnerable to quantum cascade failures, Marcus explained with the clinical precision of a scientist delivering a research paper. Especially when those failures are deliberately induced by people who have had 6 months to study every scrap of Void Hunter technology they could recover from the outer colonies. The council members watched in stunned, horrified silence as their most feared weapons were systematically torn apart. Ships that had ended entire civilizations. Beings that existed beyond the reach of conventional warfare. All of them destroyed by forces they had never encountered before. Forces that shouldn't have existed. The beautiful thing about humans, Marcus said, and now his voice carried genuine pride, is that we specialize in impossible solutions to unsolvable problems. You sent the Void Hunters to erase us from existence, so we built existence erasers that were bigger, more efficient, and powered by the kind of desperate innovation that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The final image showed empty space where the Void Hunter fleet had been. Not even debris. Just void. And a single human vessel broadcasting a message throughout the galaxy on every frequency imaginable. A woman's voice, clear and strong. "This is Captain Lisa Chen of the Terran Defense Force. Any species, government, or entity that threatens humanity or human interests will be met with immediate and total retaliation. We have already proven that no weapon, no technology, and no tactical advantage can protect you from a species that refuses to accept defeat." Marcus looked around the chamber, meeting each council member's gaze in turn. Several of them looked physically ill. Others seemed to have gone into some kind of shock. "That was 3 days ago," he said quietly. Since then, we've been very busy. The silence stretched on and on. Nearly a full minute of absolute quiet in a chamber that had echoed with alien voices for 3,000 years. When that silence finally broke, it was with the soft sound of the speaker's crystalline form dimming to barely visible levels. Marcus had learned to read alien body language over the past few months, and this was the equivalent of a human going into complete shock. The speaker's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. You're claiming that humanity has single-handedly defeated 3 separate council fleets, including forces that have never known defeat in millennia of warfare. Marcus felt his earlier rage crystallize into something far more dangerous. Absolute confidence. The kind of certainty that comes from knowing you hold all the cards in a poker game where the stakes are the survival of civilizations. I'm not claiming anything, he replied, his voice steady as bedrock. I'm stating facts that can be verified by your own intelligence networks. He paused, letting that sink in for a moment. Unless, of course, you'd prefer a practical demonstration. Marcus gestured toward the chamber's massive viewing portal. It was designed to show the space around the council's mobile headquarters, a region that should have been empty except for the usual diplomatic escort vessels. Clean space. Safe space. Protected by the most advanced defensive systems the galaxy had to offer. Instead, it was filled with human ships. But these weren't the jury-rigged mining equipment and converted civilian craft from the early battles. These were purpose-built warships that looked like they'd been designed by people who understood exactly how galactic warfare was supposed to work. And had decided to do it better. Much better. 73 vessels, Marcus said, his tone as casual as someone discussing the weather. Each one crewed by volunteers. Each one equipped with technologies that didn't exist 6 months ago. Each one commanded by people who have learned that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations can be beaten by humans who refuse to accept the word impossible. The council members stared at the tactical displays in stunned silence. Human vessels in perfect formation around their supposedly impregnable headquarters. Ships that had appeared without triggering a single early warning system. Positioned with surgical precision that suggested they knew every detail of council defensive protocols. How was that possible? These were systems that had been classified beyond top secret for millennia. Defensive networks that had protected the council's mobile headquarters through wars, rebellions, and countless diplomatic crises. And the humans had waltzed right through them like they didn't exist. But the ships aren't the real message, Marcus continued, his voice carrying a new edge. Something that made even the most arrogant council members pay attention. The real message is standing right here in front of you. He straightened to his full height. Something in his posture, the way he held his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the absolute stillness of a predator who had cornered his prey, made every being in that chamber understand a fundamental truth. They weren't looking at a representative of a primitive species begging for mercy anymore. They were looking at the herald of something entirely new. Something that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. 6 months ago, humanity was a single-world civilization barely capable of interplanetary flight, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Today, we have fleets positioned throughout this sector. Manufacturing facilities that can produce technologies you haven't seen before. And most importantly, he paused, meeting the gaze of each council member in turn. We have something that none of your ancient civilizations possess anymore. Which is? The question came from one of the minor council members, barely audible in the vast chamber. Marcus smiled. But this time, the expression was genuinely warm. The smile of someone sharing good news with old friends. We have the absolute certainty that comes from discovering we can beat anyone who threatens our families. He began walking toward the chamber exit, his diplomatic mission apparently complete. His footsteps echoed in the silence like gunshots. But at the threshold, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. The Galactic Council has operated for 3,000 years on one assumption. That advanced civilizations are inherently superior to primitive ones. His voice carried the weight of history changing in real time. That assumption is now obsolete. Humanity has proven that desperation plus innovation equals evolution. And that evolution can happen faster than your political systems can adapt. Marcus's expression grew serious. The friendly warmth disappeared, replaced by something that made several council members actually lean back in their seats. So here's what happens next. The Council will acknowledge humanity as a sovereign species with full territorial rights and defensive guarantees. You will provide reparations for the civilian casualties your integration attempts caused. And you will establish formal diplomatic relations based on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority. The speaker's crystalline form flickered with what might have been defiance. Or desperation. Hard to tell the difference at this point. And if we refuse? Marcus's final smile was the most terrifying thing the Galactic Council had ever witnessed. Not because it was cruel or angry, but because it was genuinely friendly. The smile of someone who was completely comfortable with whatever response they chose to give. Then you'll discover that the 3 fleets you've already lost were just our way of introducing ourselves. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to strain to hear him. Humanity is no longer interested in being anyone's victim. We've learned we're very, very good at being something else entirely. The chamber doors closed behind him with a soft hiss. Marcus Rivera, former Special Forces operator, survivor of the impossible, and humanity's first galactic ambassador, left behind a council that would spend the next several hours debating whether they were more afraid of accepting humanity's terms or refusing them. Outside those doors, 73 human warships maintained their perfect formation around the galaxy's seat of power. Patient as wolves waiting for the pack leader's signal. The age of human expansion had begun. And the galaxy would never be the same again. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments what's the most satisfying moment you've ever witnessed. And of course, subscribe for more stories like this where humanity shows the universe exactly what we're made of.